After hours of intensive testing on Shenhe, here is my day 1 first impression on Shenhe. To get started, here is the current Shenhe that I'll be showcasing in this video. I have about 3000 attack with a decent crit rate to crit damage ratio and about 60 to 110. I also have 150 energy recharge and my Shenhe is currently at level 80 with Constellation 0 and a talent 288. Now Shenhe elemental skill and burst feel very nice to use. This is because Shenhe elemental skill have almost 0 end lag, which allow you to chain her elemental skill into elemental burst almost immediately. Now while Shenhe feel very good to use, in my opinion, she doesn't feel very good to play. This is because the entire Shenhe kit revolve around making your other cryo party member do a bigger damage. Her elemental skill, well, make other party member do bigger number. Her elemental burst, decrease enemy cryo resistance as well as increase your cryo damage bonus for your entire party. Her entire kit is pretty much just adding damage on top of your other cryo characters. And it's really hard to observe what is actually happening in actual combat. With another character like Kazuha, you can see the effect of what Kazuha is currently doing. He's pulling in enemy with his elemental skill, and he's creating a giant dome with his elemental burst. With a character like Kokomi, you can see that she's summoning a jellyfish which is deployed off field, and it will supply a hydro application so that you can freeze the enemy. Just likewise, using Kokomi elemental burst allow you to heal your entire party, which means that you can immediately see what Kokomi is currently doing. Shenhe does not add an extra attack. Shenhe does not even attack. She simply make your existing attack that you were already doing a bigger number. So it doesn't feel good to play because it's not obvious at all if Shenhe is even doing anything in the party, and it feels like you're just missing a party member. Well, even though you're not, but it just feels that way. This is especially true on Shenhe's stack mechanics because she gives you a very small amount of stacks. For example, if you tap her elemental skill, you get 5 stacks, which can all be consumed in like 1 Ayaka charge attack or like 2 Ganyu elemental skills. Or even worse, when you're using something like Ganyu elemental burst or Ayaka elemental burst, it's pretty much all consumed at the very beginning of the fight. Let's start with a quick demonstration of what Shenhe can do. Currently, my Ayaka can do about 5000 damage per charge attack tick, as demonstrated here. Now let's add in the Shenhe buff and let's see what's up. I can do about 10,000 damage per tick on a crit instead, which is exactly double. However, do know that Shenhe's stack will be consumed very fast and it effectively only buff a single Ayaka charge attack. On the second Ayaka charge attack, the damage has pretty much returned to normal to about 5,000 to 6,000 damage per tick. So it feels like you're simply adding damage into like 1 second worth of attack and then you're doing nothing for the rest of the rotation. So overall, to me, Shenhe feels a little bit bad to play because it feels like she doesn't really do that much. Once again, it doesn't mean she's not doing anything, it just feels that way. In the background, she could be adding a lot of damage to your entire party. Shenhe also have some major energy issues as her elemental skill have a very long cooldown but generate little amount of energy. When you tap the skill, it have a 10-second cooldown but only generate 2 or 2 free cryo particle, which is very little. Furthermore is that if you run a Phonius Lens, it's rather hard to proc the Phonius Lens on Shenhe because her elemental skill have 1 instance of damage and her elemental burst have 1 instance of damage. So if you do an elemental skill followed by elemental burst, you only get 2 instances of cryo damage, which means you only get 2 instances to proc your Phonius Lens, which is very little. This means that it might be unreliable to proc a Phonius Lens, especially if you have low crit rate or low refinement, which further contribute to the energy issues. The major thing about Shenhe is that she's really not enough to battery your main cryo character, whether that be Ganyu or Ayaka or even Rosario or Kaya. She's just not enough to battery your main cryo DPS, which is a very big deal. That means if you have to start building energy recharge on your main DPS, you will start losing out damage. This is also observed during the team drafting portion of Shenhe gameplay. For example, let's take the traditional Ganyu Morgana team and attempt to replace one of the members with Shenhe. You immediately observe a negative effect being actively done to your team. For example, replacing the Diona with Shenhe means that you lose all healing and shielding, and it's very obvious that you lose it out. Replacing the Venti with Shenhe means that you lose the grouping, the Anemos reaction, the VV shred, which once again is very noticeable that you are losing something now. Likewise, replacing the Mona mean that you lose freeze reaction entirely, which once again, it's very noticeable that some negative damage is being done to your team, but it's not very obvious of what positive gain you're gaining from it. making putting Shenhe in kind of feel bad. Now, of course, again, to clarify, this does not mean Shenhe is bad, as I will later bring on the mono cryo team, but it's simply speaking from a gameplay perspective that it feels like Shenhe doesn't do that much aside from removing key element from your team, even though that might not be the case. In fact, if you're already a owner of Ganyu or Ayaka, do you really have any reason to roll a Shenhe and put her into your party? This is because if you already have Ganyu, then you can just play with existing team like Morgana, and you probably can perform well enough, especially in the Abyss, to clear the Abyss. And although you might say, oh, I want to face unfeasible enemy, in that case you could just substitute temporarily with the Rosaria, or maybe you can even play Mel Ganyu, especially against bosses. For me, I feel like there is not a meaningful enough upgrade of trying to roll a Shenhe if you are a owner of Ganyu or Ayaka. Because of this, throughout my testing, I actually started trying to avoid these two characters or a team that just involve a lot of the 5-star characters, because I feel like if you already have those characters, especially a team filled with 5 stars, the chances of you being beneficial from obtaining a Shenhe is not meaningful enough. With that being said, however, if you do have Ayaka or Ganyu, Shenhe does pair alright with those characters, as Shenhe is able to grant a huge amount of bonus throughout her elemental burst, which is about 30% elemental burst damage and 15 crowd resistance down. It worked, but we will need more math to determine whether or not Shenhe actually does provide a good amount of damage here. One of the things I really enjoy about Shenhe is that she does make the team a little bit easier to use potentially. This is because Shenhe herself does not actually care to attack, but rather just attach onto your other attack. So when I'm playing Ganyu together with Shenhe, Ganyu elemental bursts have such a huge radius and it will auto target the enemy, which means that the Ganyu elemental burst will always be guaranteed to hit, which also means that the Shenhe elemental skill is guaranteed to hit and proc on that Ganyu elemental burst as well. So I don't have to do anything. I don't have to aim, I don't have to position, I don't even have to press any button. I know that my Shenhe elemental skill is already guaranteed to hit, which just means that it's one less skills or attack I have to worry about hitting the enemy, and this is especially true against the wolf, where every attack you're like, oh, is this enemy gonna stay for me to hit my elemental skill? Where on Shenhe you're just like, yeah, I already know I'm gonna hit it because the Ganyu elemental burst is gonna hit it anyway, so you don't have to worry about that. Overall, it is simply easier to use. After hours of testing, I ended up landing on the mono cryo team, which I think is the most suitable team for Shenhe. This team have 4 party members that can utilize Shenhe elemental skills, as every one of them can do crowd damage, including Kazuha, which can be dealt using his elemental skill plunges, as well as his elemental burst infusion, which means that he can fully proc Shenhe elemental skill quarrel. On top of that, when Kazuha swallows a cryo, he will give every single party member a crowd damage bonus, which can further amplify the Shenhe quarrel stacks. That means, for example, your Diona can first do meaningful damage by using the Shenhe quarrel stacks, and then that damage will get further amplified by the crowd damage bonus that was provided by Kazuha, which I commonly like to refer as double dipping, because now you're double dipping from 2 buff, which is very strong. This also increased the value of Kazuha, which I really like, because previously when you put Kazuha into like a Morgana team like this, the only party member who really care about the crowd damage bonus buff is Ganyu. Diona didn't really care, Mona didn't really care. But now when you replace it with the Shenhe, every party member, including Kazuha and Diona, do a meaningful amount of crowd damage bonus, so Kazuha just get more value because now the buff can be properly utilized by every single character. I really enjoy this team for several reasons. First of all, this team solved the Shenhe energy issues as well as your main crowd damage dealer, because now that you have triple cryo party member, especially one being Diona, Diona with a sacrificial bow can generate a huge amount of crowd energy, which really helps solve the energy issues that Shenhe have. Furthermore, Diona also provides healing and shielding, so that means you can run Shenhe without the concern of sacrificing a healer or shooter, because you already have one, which is again the Diona. However, what makes me really enjoy about this team is how easy it is to play and how comfortable it is to play on top of the energy thing. First of all, this team is very easy to play. You pretty much just spam all your elemental skill and elemental burst off cooldown. While there is a rotation that you can do, and it definitely helps by doing that rotation, is not actually too important aside from knowing the basic like snapshotting your buff onto Rosaria elemental burst, as well as just funneling energy from your elemental skill, so cast your elemental burst first before you cast your elemental skills, as you cannot recharge a elemental burst that is already full. But other than that, you pretty much just spam all your elemental skill and elemental burst. There's no specific order that you have to cast on your Kazuha, because no matter what, you soar in cryo anyway. So Anytime that you have your Kazu elemental skill off cooldown, you just cast them because you always swirl cryo, which is the element that you want to swirl. But what makes this team really easy to play is the fact that Shenhe elemental skill and elemental burst resistance is dynamic. While Shenhe elemental burst will give you 15 crowd damage bonus, which you have the snapshot, her elemental burst, the crowd resistance down, as well as her elemental skill, the cryo stacks, are all dynamic. That means you can first cast your Rosaria elemental burst, cast your Diona elemental burst, and then cast your elemental skill from Shenhe after. You will be able to get the cryo stacks onto those characters anyway, and they'll still proc those cryo stacks and further increasing their damage. That means that not following a strict order on this team is actually okay. You actually don't lose out too much by not following a strict order, which means you pretty much can just spam elemental skill and elemental burst. In fact, during my gameplay, I actually have very successful Abyss clear simply by spamming all my elemental skill and elemental burst. I just switch to a character, check if their skill or burst is up, I cast it, and then switch to the next character and do the same thing. I pay zero attention to what the enemy were doing at all. I pay zero attention to what my character are doing at all. I just press every single button and I clear Abyss very comfortably. That is what I enjoy very much about this team, is that the ease of play is very easy to play. While we on the topic of Abyss, I want to make a quick call out that the current blessing of the Abyssal Moon is very strong. It's able to grant you up to 100% of bonus elemental damage, which is basically doubling your damage. Now, I try to cast my Kazu elemental skill as often as possible, which break the buff, because you'll be doing anemo damage, so you break the crowd damage bonus buff. But just as a quick call out, as this buff is very favorable for mono element team like mono geo or mono cryo. So something to note is that the background footage might not fully represent the actual damage that this team can do. Again, we'll have to wait for mathematics on this, and this of course also applies to any other video you see on. However, of course, mono crowd team does not come without problem. First of all, comparing to existing freeze team, you just lose out on freeze, which means you lose out on one of the best reaction in the game, as freeze is very comfortable, as well as it makes the enemy stop moving. But more importantly is that you lose the 20% extra critical rate you get from Business Trader set, and could be very damaging to your damage. But second of all, the problem is that Shenhe does not scale well into AoE content at all. Shenhe elemental skill stack does not scale in any form or way according to the number of enemy you face. That means that when you are facing 2 enemy, you do the same damage. When you're facing 3 enemy, you do the same damage, which is the exact problem with Yoimiya. And I noticed this really bad because when I start fighting the Magu Genki, which has 3 major enemy, I noticed a major performance hit on my party, as now I'm facing 3 enemy instead of the 2, which is pretty much in the other chamber. Like the other chamber just have 2 wolf or 2 rune guard. Outside of mono crowd team, I also tried Shenhe in many other team composition like Melt Ganyu, or with Chongyun, or with Ayaka, and I noticed a major problem across pretty much every single one of these teams, and that is there isn't a open position for Shenhe available. You know, in Melt Ganyu, you don't really have a spot because you really should bring a shielder like Zhongli. If you don't care for a shielder, of course you can bring Shenhe, but you can also bring a lot of the other characters like Kazuha for Anemo Sword, as well as crowd damage bonus buff. There just isn't a position open for Shenhe. If this game was a 5-party member game, then maybe, but unfortunately this game is a 4-party member game and there isn't a 5th party member slot available for Shenhe, and that is the biggest problem outside of mono crowd team. You can even ask similar question in a mono crowd team with Shenhe. Assuming you have Ayaka, Ganyu, and Kazu, and you want to play a mono crowd team with Shenhe. Oh, as I mentioned, the best way to play Shenhe is a mono crowd team, so doesn't this team really good? Well, yes, but if you already have Ayaka and Ganyu and Kazu, which are the top character of the game, do you really care to roll a Shenhe and put into this team? And besides, how different is this team even compared to just putting a Hydro character in this team, which also gives you freeze? It's just there isn't really any open slot for Shenhe to be put into anywhere, and this is the reason why I end up settling onto this 4-star team here instead, because that means that you can play this team without Ganyu or Ayaka still, and it's still a mono crowd team, and it worked really well. You can replace the Rosaria here with Kaya, which pretty much gives you the same results, or even replacing the Diona here with both Rosaria and Kaya, but although you do go with our healer in this case. In fact, the way I see it is that instead of Shenhe being a crowd support / buffer, she's actually a invisible DPS. It is invisible because it's hard to tell that Shenhe is actually the person in your party doing the damage. However, you have to understand that at the end of the day, Shenhe is still the character in your party who do the damage. She's simply transferring damage that she do onto other character attack and using their artifact, Shenhe elemental skill is still where your damage come from. I know it is hard to grasp this concept around a lot of people's head, but if you do understand it, that it will make sense and it will see Shenhe in a different light or form. Once you understand that concept, well, I would have to say like Shenhe is a character that you probably roll for if you just want to play Shenhe or you want to play mono cryo. Similar to how if you want to play mono Geo or you want to play Ito, then you roll for Ito. You don't roll for Ito because he's very broken, you just roll for Ito because you want to play for Ito. With that being said, however, because it doesn't do anything exceptional, at the current moment, I cannot recommend rolling for Shenhe at all. I think it's just a little bit too niche. We will see in the full meta analysis that I eventually make in a following week. However, again, at the current moment, I think Shenhe work well in mono cryo, work really well in mono cryo, however. But is mono cryo meta, is mono cryo really good? We will have to wait for the calculation to see, so I'll leave that here. With that being said, as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.